All right, so we're going to finish chapter 3 now in Joseph Campbell's Primitive Mythology. Chapter 3 is entitled The Culture Province of the High Civilizations, and we are on section 4 of chapter 3. The Hieratic City-State, circa 3500 to 2500 BC. We have taken note of the Proto-Neolithic period of the Natufians, which is to be dated somewhere between 7500 and 5500 BC, when the first signs of an incipient grain agriculture appeared in widely scattered parts of the Near East. The Basal Neolithic of the earliest settled villages, circa 5500 to 4500 BC, centered apparently in regions neighboring the upper reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates river systems, but extending eastward into Iran, westward into Anatolia, now Turkey, and southward along the Mediterranean into Egypt. And then finally, the High Neolithic of the Halaf and Samarra pottery styles, circa 4500 to 3500 BC, and the Ubaid style in the Riverine South, circa 4000 to 3500 BC, when the abstract concept of a geometrically organized aesthetic field and certain abstract and stylized symbols, the Maltese cross, swastika, rosette, double axe, and bucranium, first appear in our documentation of human thought, together with the earliest examples of a Neolithic series of naked female figurines representing functions of the fertility goddess of a well-established land-rooted peasantry. Sometimes Campbell can write very, very long sentences. This last was the period when the earliest signs of human habitation began appearing in the mudflats of the riverine Mesopotamia. Furthermore, over the whole area from Anatolia to Egypt, and from the Mediterranean to Iran, the more strategically situated villages began developing into market towns, while some of the smaller villages seem to have begun specializing in particular crafts. For example, in a small but extremely interesting site known to archaeology as Arpakia in northern Iraq, not far from the larger walled settlement of Nineveh, there was found, in the center of the community, the large shop of an extraordinarily competent potter, who appears to have been the headman of the village. He had set out many of his bowls on display on shelves around the walls of his comparatively large adobe dwelling, so that we get the impression of a community of peasant potters, tilling their own fields and breeding their cattle, but fashioning their beautiful halafware not for themselves alone, but for an elite market somewhere else as well, possibly Nineveh, the nearby larger town. For trade was developing in this period no less than agriculture and the arts of pottery, stone carving, jewelry, and weaving. It was, moreover, in the larger market towns of this period, as we have seen, that the earliest ziggurats appeared in the course of the 4th millennium BC, symbolizing apparently the pivot of the universe where the life-generating union of the powers of earth and heaven was consummated in a ritual marriage. Perhaps the ritual was enacted by a divine queen and her spouse, if kings and queens can be assumed to have come into being already in this early day. We know exactly nothing of the social and political structure of the High Neolithic market town. However, in the period immediately following that of the Hieratic state, which may be dated for the South Mesopotamian riverine towns, schematically circa 3500 to 2500 BC, we encounter a totally new and remarkable situation. For at the level of the archaeological stratum known as Uruk A, which is immediately above the Obeid and can be roughly placed at circa 3500 BC, the South Mesopotamian temple areas can be seen to have increased notably in size and importance, and then, with stunning abruptness, at a crucial date that can be almost precisely fixed at 3200 BC, in the period of the archaeological stratum known as Uruk B, there appears in this little Sumerian mud garden as though the flowers of its tiny cities were suddenly bursting into bloom, the whole cultural syndrome that has since constituted the germinal unit of all of the high civilizations of the world. And we cannot attribute this event to any achievement of the mentality of simple peasants. Nor was it the mechanical consequences of a simple piling up of material artifacts economically determined. It was actually and clearly the highly conscious creation, this much can be asserted with complete assurance, of the mind and science of a new order of humanity, which had never before appeared in the history of mankind, namely, the professional, full-time, initiated, strictly regimented temple priest. The new inspiration of civilized life was based first on the discovery, through long and meticulous, carefully checked and rechecked observations, that there were, besides the sun and moon, 5 other visible or barely visible heavenly spheres, to wit, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which moved in established courses according to established laws along the ways followed by the sun and moon among the fixed stars, and then second on to the almost insane, playful yet potentially terrible notion that the laws governing the movements of the 7 heavenly spheres should in some mystical way be the same as those governing the life and thought of men on earth. The whole city, not simply the temple area, was now conceived as an imitation on earth of the cosmic order, a sociological middle cosmos, or mesocosm, established by priestcraft between the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the individual, making visible the one essential form of all. The king was the center, as a human representative of the power made celestially manifest either in the sun or in the moon, according to the focus of the local cult. The walled city was organized architecturally in the design of a quartered circle, like the circles designed on the ceramic ware of the period just preceding. Centered around the pivotal sanctum of the palace or ziggurat, as the ceramic designs around the cross, rosette, or swastika, and there was a mathematically structured calendar to regulate the seasons of the city's life according to the passages of the sun and moon among the stars, as well as a highly developed system of liturgical arts, including music, the art rendering audible to human ears the world-ordering harmony of the celestial spheres. It was at this moment in human destiny that the art of writing first appeared in the world, and that scriptorially documented history therefore begins. Also the wheel appeared, and we have evidence of the development of the 2 numerical systems still normally employed throughout the civilized world, the decimal and the sexagesimal. The former was used mostly for business accounts in the offices of the temple compounds, where the grain was stored that had been collected as taxes, and the latter for the ritualistic measuring of space and time as well. 360 degrees, then as now, represented the circumference of a circle, the cycle of the horizon, while 360 days plus 5 marked the measurement of the circle of the year, the cycle of time. The 5 intercalated days that bring the total to 365 were taken to represent a sacred opening through which spiritual energy flowed into the round of the temporal universe from the pleroma of eternity, and they were designated consequently days of holy feast and festival. Comparably, the ziggurat, the pivotal point in the center of the sacred circle of space, where the earthly and heavenly powers joined, was also characterized by the number 5. For the 4 sides of the tower, oriented to the points of the compass, came together at the summit, the 5th point, and it was there that the energy of heaven met the earth. The early Sumerian temple tower, with the hieratically organized little city surrounding it, where everyone played his role according to the rules of a celestially inspired divine game, supplied the model of paradise that we find centuries later in the Hindu-Buddhist imagery of the world mountain, Sumeru, whose jeweled slopes, facing the 4 directions, peopled on the west by sacred serpents, on the south by gnomes, and on the north by earth giants, and on the east by divine musicians, rose from the midpoint of the earth as the vertical axis of the egg-shaped universe, and bore on its quadrangular summit the palatial mansions of the deathless gods, whose towered city was known as Amaravati, the town immortal. But it was the model also of the Greek Olympus, the Aztec temples of the sun, and Dante's holy mountain of Purgatory, bearing on its summit the earthly paradise. For the form and concept of the city of God, conceived as a mesocosm, an earthly imitation of the celestial order of the macrocosm, which emerged on the threshold of history circa 3200 BC, at precisely that geographical point where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates reached the Persian Gulf, was disseminated eastward and westward along the ways already blazed by the earlier Neolithic. The wonderful life-organizing assemblage of ideas and principles, including those of kingship, writing, mathematics, and calendrical astronomy, reached the Nile to inspire the civilization of the first dynasty of Egypt, circa 2800 BC. It spread to Crete on the one hand, and on the other to the valley of the Indus, circa 2600 BC, to Shang China, circa 1600 BC, and according to at least one high authority, Dr. Robert Hein Geldern, from China across the Pacific, during the prosperous seafaring period of the late Zhou dynasty, between the 7th and 4th centuries BC, to Peru and Middle America. It was the last fact, if the last fact be true as well as the rest, and its likelihood is considered in the following chapters, then it can be said without exaggeration that all the high civilization of the world are to be thought of as limbs of one great tree, whose root is in heaven. And should we now attempt to formulate the sense or meaning of that mythological root, the life-inspiring monad that precipitated the image of man's destiny as an organ of the living cosmos, we might say that the psychological need to bring the parts of a large and socially differentiated settled community, comprising a number of newly developed social classes, priests, kings, merchants, and peasants, into an orderly relationship to each other, and simultaneously to suggest the play through all of a higher, all-suffusing, all-informing, energizing principle, this profoundly felt psychological as well as sociological requirement must have been fulfilled with the recognition, sometime in the 4th millennium BC, of the orderly round dance of the 5 visible planets and the sun and the moon through the constellations of the zodiac. This celestial order, then, became the model for mankind in the building of an earthly order of coordinated wills. a model for both kings and philosophers, inasmuch as it seemed to show forth the supporting law not only of the universe, but of every particle within it. In our normally earthly way of knowledge, we may become distracted by the multiplicity of the world's effects, as well as by our misdirected desires for personal power and pleasure, and losing touch with the inward order of our being, go astray. But the law of heaven now shall set us aright, for as we read once again in the words of Plato, the motions akin to the divine part in us are the thoughts and revolutions of the universe. These, therefore, every man should follow, in correcting those circuits in the head that were deranged at birth, by learning how to know the harmonies and revolutions of the world. He should bring the intelligent part, according to its pristine nature, into the likeness of that which intelligence discerns, and thereby win the fulfillment of the best in life set by the gods before mankind, both for this present time and for the life to come. The Egyptian term for this universal order was Mat. In India it is Dharma, and in China, Tao. And if we now try to convey in a sentence the sense and meaning of all the myths and rituals that have sprung from this conception of a universal order, we may say that they are its structuring agents, functioning to bring the human order into accord with the celestial. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The myths and rites constitute a mesocosm, a meditating middle cosmos, through which the microcosm of the individual is brought into relation to the macrocosm of the all. And this mesocosm is the entire context of the body social, which is thus a kind of living poem, hymn or icon of mud and reeds, and of flesh and blood, and of dreams fashioned into the art form of the hieratic city-state. Life on earth is to mirror as nearly perfectly as is possible in human bodies the almost hidden, yet now discovered, order of the pageant of the spheres. Well, that concludes Chapter 3. Thank you for joining me. Next time we'll be reading Chapter 4, The Province of the Immolated Kings. Enjoy your day.